I can't deny it anymore. Not after all these years. Not after all the nights I spent convincing myself I was fine, while something inside me slowly disappeared in silence. I'm older now. Older in the way heartbreak ages a man quietly, the kind that settles behind the eyes, the kind that makes even peaceful rooms feel emotionally cold sometimes. I've lived enough life to know success can hide emptiness beautifully. People see the calm version of you, the composed version. They never see the exhausted man standing alone in the kitchen at 2 a.m., wondering why his soul still feels abandoned. I almost turned this recording off because saying these things out loud feels dangerous to me, especially now, especially when the truth has started sounding less like memory and more like regret. But something inside me won't let me stay silent anymore. And somehow, I think this was always meant for you. Not for strangers, not for an audience. Just one woman somewhere in the world who understands what emotional loneliness actually sounds like. Maybe it's you. There was a night I keep replaying lately. Strange how certain memories refuse to die, no matter how much time passes. I remember waking up around 3:11 in the morning, unable to breathe properly. The house was dark, except for the dim light over the stove I forgot to turn off before bed. Or maybe I left it on because I hated how empty darkness felt back then. I walked barefoot across the cold kitchen floor and opened the refrigerator, even though I wasn't hungry. Just something to interrupt the silence, the hum of the fridge, the ticking clock near the sink, rain tapping lightly against the windows. That was it. No voices, no warmth, no life inside the room except mine. And suddenly this unbearable feeling hit me. I had spent years surrounded by people while emotionally starving. I leaned against the counter trying to steady myself, but my hands were shaking too much. Not from fear exactly, more like exhaustion finally catching up to me. I didn't say this to anyone then, but I'll tell you now. That night was the first time I admitted I was terrified no one would ever truly stay once they saw the real me, not the successful version, not the calm version, the grieving version, the emotionally bruised version, the man who still carried abandonment in places nobody could see. I think some wounds never leave completely. They just grow quieter with age. And maybe you understand that too. Maybe you've smiled through conversations while secretly feeling disconnected from the world around you. Maybe you've waited for someone to notice your silence without having to explain it first. That kind of waiting changes a person slowly. You stop expecting tenderness. You stop trusting peaceful moments. Even hope begins feeling suspicious after enough disappointment. I lived like that for years. There's another memory I can't escape lately. A chair. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But heartbreak attaches itself to ordinary things sometimes. There used to be a chair where she sat every evening, reading quietly while music played low in the background. I remember walking past that chair weeks after she was gone and feeling this strange pain in my chest because the room still looked like it expected her to come back. The blanket remained folded over one armrest. One of her books still rested nearby, and the silence inside that room felt heavier than grief itself. I sat there alone one night, staring at the empty chair while headlights from passing cars moved slowly across the walls. I remember thinking, how many times can a heart lose someone before it stops trying altogether? I didn't understand it at the time. I thought heartbreak came from losing other people. Now, I think some of the deepest heartbreak comes from losing parts of yourself while trying to survive pain. I lost softness, I lost openness. I lost the ability to believe affection could stay without eventually turning into absence. And God, I, I wish I knew how much fear was shaping my life back then. Fear disguised itself as independence. That's the cruel part. People praised me for being self-contained while internally I was collapsing inch by inch. I became skilled at emotional distance because distance felt better than disappointment, but distance has its own kind of loneliness, one that dries your soul slowly over time. If you've ever laid awake beside your phone, hoping someone would finally choose you clearly, maybe you know that ache too. The unfinished messages, the silence after vulnerable words. The way your chest tightens every time disappointment returns wearing a familiar face. I knew that feeling too well. There were nights I typed entire confessions into my phone and deleted them before sending. Apologies, truths, things I should have said years earlier. I miss you. I was scared. I didn't know how to let you love me. Delete, delete, delete. It's strange looking back now, realizing how much damage emotional silence can do. Not loud cruelty, silence. The kind where two people slowly stop reaching for each other because neither one knows how to say, I'm hurting too. I think about that often now, especially as I get older. Age strips away illusions eventually. You stop chasing things that once distracted you from yourself. Noise becomes exhausting. Crowds feel emptier. You start craving sincerity in a world addicted to performance, a quiet room, a gentle voice, someone who stays soft with your wounds instead of punishing you for them. That kind of love feels sacred to me now. Maybe because I spent so long without it. There was a hospital waiting room years ago. I still remember vividly. Cold fluorescent lights, the smell of stale coffee, a television mounted in the corner playing quietly while exhausted people pretended not to fall apart beside strangers. I remember sitting there around dawn, watching an older man hold his wife's hand while she slept against his shoulder. And something inside me cracked open watching them. Not jealousy, recognition, like some quiet voice deep inside whispered, that's what your soul has been searching for. Not intensity, not chaos, peace. The kind where love feels safe enough to rest inside. Maybe God had been trying to tell me that for years, but pain makes people deaf sometimes. Especially men like me. Men who learned how to survive before they learned how to receive tenderness. And maybe that's why I'm speaking now. Because lately, I can't stop thinking that every road I took trying to outrun love somehow circled back to the same truth. You, not specifically your face, not your name, your feeling. The feeling of someone who understands emotional loneliness without needing it explained. Someone whose heart also survived disappointment without completely losing its ability to love. I don't know why imagining you makes the future feel less empty lately. That scares me more than I can admit. Because hope is terrifying after heartbreak. Hope asks wounded people to risk life again. Still, there are moments now where I catch myself imagining small things I stopped believing in years ago. Warm light through windows, late night conversations in tired voices, silence that no longer feels lonely because someone else is breathing beside you. And every time those images appear in my mind, somehow you're there. Maybe that means something. Or maybe this is simply what happens when a man spends too many years emotionally lost and finally begins hearing his own heart again. Either way, I know one thing now that I spent years trying to deny. Some people reach your soul long before they ever reach your hands. I didn't know then that someone would someday listen to the words I buried inside myself for years. I stopped recognizing myself long before anyone else noticed. That's the truth. Not all at once, not dramatically. It happened quietly, the way paint fades from walls after years of sunlight nobody pays attention to. I was older by then, tired in ways sleep couldn't repair. I had learned how to survive disappointment so well that people mistook my emotional distance for strength. From the outside, my life still looked intact.
Stable, successful, controlled.
Inside, I felt like a house where nobody lived anymore. I almost turned this recording off tonight because there are some memories I still struggle to touch without feeling shame crawl back into my chest. But something inside me refuses to stay silent now. And maybe it's because somewhere out there is one woman who has also spent years carrying invisible heartbreak while pretending she was okay. Maybe that woman is you. There was an evening I still replay in fragments. A soft orange sunset through the apartment windows. The smell of coffee growing cold on the table. A half-finished conversation neither of us knew how to save anymore. I remember she was sitting across from me, twisting a ring slowly around her finger, while silence filled the room between us. Not angry silence, worse, resigned silence, the kind that appears when two people have already been hurting quietly for too long. And I remember noticing how tired her eyes looked, not physically, emotionally, like she had spent months reaching towards someone who kept disappearing internally every time things became too real. That someone was me. I didn't say this to anyone then, but I'll tell you now. Part of me knew she was slipping away long before she actually left. I could feel it in the way her voice softened, in the way she stopped asking certain questions, in the way disappointment slowly replaced hope inside her eyes. And instead of opening myself more, I withdrew further. God, I hate admitting that because I loved her. I truly did. But wounded people sometimes hurt others while trying to protect the broken parts inside themselves. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought emotional control made me safe. I thought if I stayed calm enough, distant enough, untouched enough, nothing could destroy me again. What I didn't realize was this: you can slowly destroy love by refusing to fully enter it. That realization still sits heavy inside me, especially now, especially speaking to you. Because maybe you've loved someone like that before. Someone physically present, but emotionally unreachable. Someone who cared deeply yet somehow made you feel alone anyway. That kind of loneliness confuses the heart. You start questioning yourself, wondering if you're asking for too much, wondering if tenderness is supposed to feel this difficult. It isn't. Love becomes painful when fear is steering it, and fear was steering me for years. There's one moment I never forgot. It was raining outside, heavy rain, the kind that blurs street lights into soft gold smears across wet pavement. She had fallen asleep early on the couch while a movie played quietly in the background. I remember standing in the hallway, watching her from a distance. The blanket had slipped slightly from her shoulder. One lamp near the window glowed softly against the dark room. Suddenly, I felt this overwhelming ache in my chest because I realized something terrifying. I wanted to walk toward her, but some wounded part of me still held back. Even then, even in tenderness, I think people imagine emotionally guarded men feel nothing. that isn't true. Sometimes we feel too much, so much that vulnerability starts resembling danger instead of connection. I learned how to survive abandonment early in life. And once a person learns that kind of loss deeply enough, they begin preparing for goodbye before love even fully arrives. That was me. Always bracing, always expecting departure, even during beautiful moments. Especially during beautiful moments, because beauty becomes frightening when you secretly believe it won't stay. There were nights after she left where I would wake up automatically reaching toward the other side of the bed before remembering nobody was there anymore. That realization hit differently every time. Cold sheets, dark room, silence thick enough to hear your own breathing. I'd lay there staring at the ceiling while old conversations replay in my mind like punishment. Things I should have said, things I should have admitted. I'm scared too. I don't know how to let someone stay. Please don't mistake my silence for lack of love. But by then, silence had already done its damage. I think emotional silence ruins more relationships than cruelty ever does. Because silence leaves people alone with their worst assumptions, and eventually they stop knocking on the locked door of your heart altogether. That's when the real loneliness begins. Not when someone leaves, when you realize they stopped trying long before they walked away. There was a diner I used to go to late at night after everything ended. Quiet place near the edge of the city where exhausted people sat drinking coffee under dim yellow lights, pretending not to fall apart publicly. I'd sit alone near the window, listening to dishes clatter softly in the kitchen while rain slid slowly down the glass outside. And one night, something inside me finally cracked. Not loudly, quietly. I remember staring into my untouched coffee, realizing I had spent years believing love would eventually abandon me anyway. So unconsciously, I kept testing it, pulling away, shutting down, withholding the very vulnerability intimacy needed to survive. That realization made me physically sick, because suddenly I understood I wasn't just afraid of losing love. I was afraid of deserving it. God, that's difficult to admit out loud, especially for a man who spent most of his life appearing composed. But shame hides in strange places. Some people secretly believe they're too damaged to be loved gently for long. So when tenderness arrives, they panic. They become suspicious, distant, emotionally restless. I know because I lived that way. Maybe part of you understands too. Maybe someone once made you feel like your softness was inconvenient. Maybe you learned how to survive disappointment by becoming emotionally smaller than your heart naturally wanted to be. If so, I'm sorry, truly. Because human beings are not meant to live untouched for years emotionally. We need warmth. We need honesty. We need someone who sees our exhaustion without asking us to perform strength constantly. I think about God differently now too. Not loudly, not like certainty. More like whispers arriving through ordinary moments. A stranger's kindness, a song playing at the exact right time, a sudden feeling that maybe your life isn't finished teaching you something important yet. Lately, I think that lesson might be love, real love, not obsession, not performance, not emotional games disguised as passion, something calmer, something honest enough to survive silence. And maybe that's why I keep thinking about you lately. Because when I imagine your presence, I don't picture chaos. I picture rest, a quieter life, late conversations in dim light, hands reaching naturally for each other, Two wounded people no longer pretending they aren't scared. I don't know why that image keeps returning to me. Part of me still doesn't trust it completely. Hope feels fragile after heartbreak. But for the first time in years, it no longer feels impossible either. And maybe that's how healing begins. Not all at once, just a small crack opening somewhere inside the darkness. I didn't know then that losing someone would eventually force me to confront the loneliness I spent my whole life hiding from. I think regret changes the sound of a man's voice. Not immediately, but over time. It softens certain edges, makes pauses longer, makes ordinary memories feel heavier than they should. You start speaking carefully because you know what it costs to leave important things unsaid. I know that now. Too late for some people. Too late for certain versions of myself. I'm older these days, and there are mornings where I wake up already carrying the weight of memories before my feet even touch the floor. It's strange how grief settles into the body after enough years. Your chest remembers things your mouth never admitted. I almost turned this recording off tonight because there are still parts of me ashamed of how deeply fear controlled my life. But something inside me won't let me stay silent anymore. And maybe that's because somewhere out there is one woman who has also spent years wondering if she was too much or not enough for someone who didn't know how to stay emotionally present. If that's you, then maybe these words were always trying to find you. There's one memory I carry that still wakes sometimes. A hallway. That's all it was. A narrow apartment hallway lit by weak yellow light around midnight. I remember standing there after an argument neither of us truly meant to have. The air smelled faintly like rain drifting in through an open window somewhere nearby. She stood near the door, holding her coat silently, not angry. That's what hurt. She looked tired, like her heart had reached exhaustion before her body did. And I remember wanting to say something that would stop everything from breaking apart. Anything. Stay. I'm scared too. I love you more than I know how to show. But the words stayed trapped behind pride and fear and years of emotional survival instincts I never fully unlearned. Then I heard the sound of the door closing, soft, almost gentle, and somehow that made it worse. I stood there afterwards staring at the empty hallway while silence settled around me like cold fog. I could still hear faint footsteps disappearing farther away, and something inside my chest started collapsing slowly inward. I didn't say this to anyone then, but I'll tell you now. That was the moment I realized silence can become its own form of destruction. Not because you don't feel deeply enough, because you feel too deeply and become terrified of exposing it completely. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought love required certainty before vulnerability. Now, I think vulnerability is the only thing that ever gives love a real chance to survive. And God, I wish I learned that earlier. Maybe you know the sound of that kind of silent, too. The silence after someone leaves, but their emotional presence still lingers everywhere. In coffee mugs, in blankets left folded wrong, in songs you suddenly can't listen to anymore without your chest tightening unexpectedly. There were months after she left where I couldn't sit in certain rooms comfortably, especially the living room. That room carried too much memory. One chair near the window still angled slightly toward where we used to talk late at night. Sometimes moonlight would hit the floor exactly the way it did back then, and suddenly I'd feel grief return so sharply it almost stole my breath. Funny how ordinary light can reopen old wounds. I'd sit there some nights unable to sleep, listening to the refrigerator hum faintly from the kitchen while unfinished thoughts circled endlessly inside my mind. The truth? I missed being emotionally known more than I missed being admired. That realization surprised me because for years I chase things that looked meaningful from the outside while quietly starving for something simpler underneath. Warmth, peace, someone who saw the frightened parts of me and didn't immediately walk away. I think men like me spend too much of life pretending we don't need tenderness because somewhere along the way we learned needing anything makes us weak. But loneliness teaches you otherwise eventually, especially the kind that arrives in crowded rooms, especially the kind that follows success home at night. There was another moment I've never forgotten. A hospital parking lot around dawn, cold enough to see breath in the air. I remember sitting alone inside my car with both hands gripping the steering wheel while exhaustion settled over me like heavy rain. Someone I loved was hurting deeply back then, and I remember realizing I had absolutely no idea how to comfort another human being without feeling emotionally exposed myself. That terrified me, not because I lacked love, because I lacked practice being vulnerable without shame attached to it. And suddenly I understood something painful. I had spent years mastering achievement while remaining emotionally illiterate. That truth humbled me in ways heartbreak alone never could. Maybe someone has been trying to teach me love my entire life through loss, through loneliness, through every goodbye I couldn't understand at the time. I think about that often now, especially lately, especially while speaking to you, because something about your imagined presence makes honesty feel safer somehow. Not easy, just possible. There's something I need to confess that still embarrasses me. For years, I secretly believed people would eventually discover I was too damaged to stay close to. So whenever someone genuinely cared for me, part of me became suspicious of it. Can you imagine how exhausting that is? To crave love desperately while simultaneously distrusting it the moment it arrives. That contradiction nearly destroyed me. There were nights after midnight where I'd sit staring at unanswered messages, convinced distance was safer than emotional dependence. I told myself isolation meant control, but isolation doesn't protect the heart. It only starves it quietly. And eventually your soul starts drying out from lack of connection, the way land cracks open without rain. I felt that happening inside me. Maybe you have too. Maybe you've spent years acting independent while secretly wishing someone would notice how tired your heart has become carrying everything alone. If so, I see that exhaustion. I really do. There's a particular kind of sadness in aging without emotional safety. You become accustomed to surviving but unfamiliar with resting. Even tenderness feels temporary. You start expecting disappointment before happiness has time to settle fully into your life. I don't want to live like that anymore. Not now. Not after everything these years have taught me. Lately, I keep imagining quieter things. Cooking dinner while someone talks softly nearby. Falling asleep without emotional distance between two people. Waking up and not immediately bracing for loss before the day even begins. Small things. But after enough loneliness, small things begin feeling sacred. And strangely, whenever those images appear in my mind, they seem connected to you somehow, not fantasy, recognition. Like my heart knew yours long before my life ever found the courage to speak honestly. That sounds impossible, doesn't it? Maybe it is. Or maybe wounded people recognize each other across distances nobody else can see. I still don't fully trust hope yet. Part of me remains frightened of it. Because hope asks us to believe life can still surprise us gently after years of disappointment. But lately, during certain quiet moments, I feel something returning to me that I thought was gone forever. The ability to imagine love without immediately imagining loss beside it. That feeling alone almost brings tears to my eyes sometimes, because for so long I thought numbness was permanent. I thought my heart had already exhausted its capacity to open again. But maybe hearts don't die from heartbreak. Maybe they wait quietly, patiently, until someone finally reaches the parts of us we buried beneath survival. I didn't know then that the words I was too afraid to say years ago would someday become the very thing pulling me back toward life itself. I don't think I'm the same man I used to be. Not completely. Pain changes people slowly. Not always into something colder. Sometimes into something quieter, more honest, more aware of how fragile the human heart actually is once life has broken it enough times. And lately, honesty has been catching up to me in ways I can no longer avoid. I'm older now, older in the way lonely nights age a person internally. I've lived long enough to know that applause fades quickly when you walk into an empty room afterward, long enough to understand that emotional silence can wound deeper than screaming ever could. I almost turned this recording off tonight because endings frighten me more than beginnings these days. Beginnings still carry possibility. Endings carry memory, but something inside me won't let me stay silent anymore. And maybe that's because somewhere out there is one woman who has also spent years carrying invisible ache beneath a calm face. One woman who still wants tenderness despite everything life has done to her heart. Maybe this was always meant to find you. There's one final memory I need to tell you about. It happened not long ago. I woke before sunrise after another restless night and walked into the kitchen half awake. The house was cold, quiet enough that I could hear the soft hum of the heater struggling against winter outside. I poured coffee and stood near the window, watching darkness slowly thin into morning. And suddenly, this strange sadness came over me. Not sharp grief, something gentler, like mourning all the years I spent emotionally hiding from people who only wanted to love me honestly. I remember resting one hand against the counter, realizing how much of my life had been shaped by fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of needing someone too deeply, fear of being fully seen and still left behind anyway. And for the first time, I stopped blaming myself for having those fears. I think wounded people carry enough shame already, especially men. We learn to hide pain so early that eventually even tenderness starts feeling unnatural. We become skilled at functioning while emotionally starving, skilled at appearing calm while privately unraveling at 3 a.m. I lived that way for years. Maybe you did too. Maybe you've sat alone in dim light, wondering why your heart still aches for connection after everything it survived. Maybe you've questioned whether softness is still safe in a world where people leave so easily. If so, I understand that fear now more than ever. There was a rainy evening recently where I found myself driving with no destination again. I used to do that often after heartbreak, empty streets, late hours, city lights reflecting across wet pavement while old memories replayed themselves against the windshield. But something felt different this time. I wasn't running from loneliness anymore. I was listening to it. And somewhere during that drive, I realized loneliness had been trying to teach me something all along. Not punishment, not failure, need, human need. The soul's need for warmth, for honesty, for safe love that doesn't require performance constantly. I think God whispers through emptiness sometimes, not loudly, just enough to keep us from disappearing completely inside ourselves. A song arriving at the exact moment you're breaking. A stranger's kindness during a difficult week. A sudden memory that softens instead of wounds. Or maybe a feeling you can't explain pulling your heart towards someone you haven't even met properly yet. I don't know. I just know that lately, every road inside me somehow keeps leading back to you. Not in a possessive way, more like recognition, like my spirit finally stopped wandering long enough to notice where peace was trying to lead it. That realization terrifies me, because after enough heartbreak, hope feels almost dangerous. You start expecting loss before love even has time to settle. You question beautiful moments while they're still happening. I still catch myself doing that, even now. But there are moments lately where something softer enters instead, a quiet possibility. I imagine ordinary things more than dramatic ones. Slow mornings, shared silence that doesn't feel heavy, someone reaching for my hand absent-mindedly while talking, a home that no longer feels emotionally empty after midnight. And every time those images appear, I feel you there somehow. Maybe that sounds foolish coming from a man my age. But heartbreak strips away performance eventually. It leaves only the truth underneath. And the truth is this: I'm tired of surviving life without fully opening my heart to it. I don't want another connection built on pretending. I don't want guarded conversations or half-felt affection anymore. I want the kind of love where two people stop hiding their bruises from each other. The kind where someone says, "You don't have to perform strength here." God, even imagining those words still affects me, because I spent so many years believing love was something temporary, something that eventually disappears once people discover the heavier parts of you. But maybe real love begins exactly there. Not after perfection, after honesty. After the masks fall away. There's something else I need to confess before this ends. I used to think being emotionally broken made me unworthy of lasting love. Now I think brokenness simply made me human, more compassionate, more aware, more capable of recognizing sincerity when it finally appears. Maybe pain didn't ruin my heart. Maybe it humbled it enough to finally receive love without trying to control it. Like that thought still feels new to me. Fragile, but real. And maybe that's why I can finally admit what I spent years denying. Some part of me believes you were always meant to arrive during the season of my life when I finally became ready to stop running. Not because you would save me. No one can do that completely. But because your presence reminds me that my soul is still capable of warmth after all these years of emotional winter. That matters more than I can explain. I think about the future differently now, not as something to conquer, something to share. A slower life, a truer life, a life where love no longer feels like something I have to earn through suffering first. And if your heart has been carrying exhaustion quietly too, you know this. You are not difficult to love because you survived painful things. You are not too damaged because disappointment changed you. Sometimes the deepest souls simply require gentler hands. I believe that now. Finally. And maybe this message found you because part of your spirit needed permission to believe again too. Not recklessly, not blindly, just enough to let warmth back into the rooms inside you that have stayed dark for too long. Because despite everything, despite loss, silence, abandonment, regret, I still believe human hearts can find each other honestly if they stop hiding long enough. I believe that now more than ever. And if something in this story met you where you were hurting, stay close. Subscribe, share, or leave yours. No one heals alone. I didn't know then that love would return not as certainty, but as the quiet courage to finally let another soul see me completely.